How's it going, everyone? Welcome, Elier Gonzalez here, and let's continue to look at the data fetching here by setting the HTTP server and finally send this document that contains a form with the proper data ready to be shipped and obviously load by the browser. So when we type in and submit, well, we know what the thing is doing, and also we can capture that data on the server. But I'm gonna do this by looking at the the HTML spec. So as you can see here over the past couple videos, this is the last part of this video. In the first video, I saw how can I set the or initialize the node project using the npm, and then initialize the git to actually keep track of any file changes. Install Typescript to know is the shape of the Jesus, sorry about that. To know the data flow of your applications. That's interesting. This repeated. Okay. Really? Okay, that's good. I should repeat that. I think that's quite all. Yeah, that's quite all. Yeah, this is a different version. No, does it work? Come on. Control K, Control V. There you got it. And then Control M, Control M. There you got it. So yeah, right. So initialize the node. Okay, so the environments that allow me to now create these applications that will interact with the OS, particularly this node bindings to the C++ language that is the bindings that is going to call that is going to run the system calls which talks to the OS to access to specific resource. The OS at the end of the day is managing all of this hardware resource and expose some nice interface. Okay, so through this entire change from the hardware or these different transistors, where now the physics happened to store these electrons and stay there, so you don't want to escape them. So from the transistors or all the way down even to the electrons, and how to capture that charge, electric charge, and hold that into a piece of device, in this case the transistors. And the more transistors that you have, the more data that you can use to represent or to enhance the or to amplify a signal, or even to store some piece of information here. That represent is this, right? Using is this binary system. So and then, well, you can create now microchip to do that, to control now and to program things, basic stuff like the display LED or LCD display. And then you started to now creating more ambitious things like an OS, and then like a compiler, and then but first like a compilers, and then like an OS, and then now an application on top of the OS. So for example, this HTTP server. So no, actually that's what it is at the end of the day. All right. And Git, well, it allows to keep track when a file change under a folder structure. as I mentioned before, the at Typescript, install Typescript, initialize Typescript, so it's actually to run this static analysis along my code and generate the desired JavaScript files. This is for code formatting, very useful. Then define the file to create a server, and I want to make a quick recap of what I did with that, which is, hey, let's going to use now one of the bindings that these JavaScript environments provide, like the HTTP bindings, to communicate to the network card and allow me to transfer hypertext media through others' computers. So to do so, the way of doing that is by creating a server that initially is going to respond to any incoming requests, right? Those incoming requests that will be processed at the using the OC models, and is going to be sent over the TCP IP, which is the protocol to transmit data between devices, transmission control protocol. And this is where you specify, for example, is the sockets. So at this layer, the transport layer, it has the information of the sockets. In other words, what is the door that you're going to send this data? In this case, is through this number, right? You have more than 65 different channels or ports that you can send data. Some of them are reserved, some of them are more, so you have now taxonomy of that. I don't want to get into the details into that. But again, once you now receive an incoming request to this application, to this server, from a user agent, from a browser, from a client computers, so when you detect that, I want you to now create a response that is going to send a document in a string-like shape, right? And to the recipient, in this case the clients, to know what is the type of documents, what is the MIME type, the media, the mail internet, the mail internet, or the Jesus, I don't know what that stands for. MIME type. Or the media type. Yeah, but I don't know why is that name stand for. Or is the content type of the MIME type. Jesus. What this stands for? Okay, even the standard recommends to do that. MIME sniffing. Look at this. Look at this. There is even a standard here. MIME sniffing. MIME sniffing standards define sniffing resource. Sniffing resource. Like, what kind of resource is this that the recipient is going to receive, right? Or the content type, but again, it doesn't describe that. So, but in any case, the HTTP content type header field is intended to indicate the MIME type of an HTTP response, which is exactly what I want to do. However, many HTTP servers supply a content type header field value that does not match the actual content of the response. Historically, web browsers have tolerated this server by examining the content of the HTTP response. In addition, so not only the header is wrong, they look at the content of the HTTP response to the content type header field in order to determine the effective MIME type of the response. Without a clear specification for how to sniff the MIME type, each user agent has been forced to reverse engineering the algorithm of other user agents in order to maintain interoperability. Inevitably, this effort has not been entirely successful, resulting in a diverse behaviors among user agents. These client applications. In some cases, this diverse behavior have had a security implications. A user agent could interpret an HTTP response as a different MIME type than the server intent. These security issues are more severe when honest servers allow potential malicious users to upload their own files and then serve the contents of those files with a low privilege MIME type. For example, if a service believes that a client will treat a contribute file as an image and thus threat isn't benign, but a user agent believes the content to be HTML and thus privileged to execute any script containing therein. An attacker might be able to steal the user authentication credentials and mount other cross-site scripting attacks. Malicious service, of course, can specify an arbitrary MIME type here. The TLDR is that there was an inconsistent way to sniffing what are the resources that servers are receiving or clients are receiving, right? And they have to do all the way down to very weird stuff here. And again, what is the MIME type? It say this is the intermediate type, but Jesus, how hard is to? How many engineers do we need to? Damn. MIME meaning. Jesus. MIME type. You know. It's a multi-purpose. They got it. That's all. It's a multi-purpose internet mail extension. That's all what I want to know. Got it. So this is what I did, right? So in order to specify the recipients, that this is the type of content, multimedia, multimedia. Did I lose my mind? Multi-purpose internet mail extension. So this is now set up the content type at the header, and this indicate the recipients, not only a user agent or a browser, but also it can be a server as well, because it might fetch this data and do some transformation or request some data to a database, for example, and then do that, right? So here now I'm defining is, in this very simple way, an HTML document. So this is why I went through describe what this HTML document here. I got this as an example here, you know, and this example is, this is what it was, right? This is the example here, the index HTML, and we'll understand now each one of those elements, part of the structure of this document. So that's what I'm gonna do briefly to describe that, and then how to send the HTML document that contains a form. An HTML form must send post send or post data to the server under filling routes, and then defining the filling route to detect incoming requests and logs it is counted. But again, let's go to define the HTML form by, well, looking at the docs. Let's take a look at the docs, and that is the HTML spec, the living standard here. That's right. Now I'm getting myself familiar with this, and just to briefly describe here, you get now the introduction of what is the intent of this document, who is the author, what are the things that you should be familiar with, like with the DOM, which is a living standard for managing events, canceling activities, and DOM nodes, the CSS for styling, JavaScript for adding scripting and behavior to your web apps, and the character encoding and character encodings like Unicode, and let me see, let me describe briefly here, at least at the audience here, right? XML, you also need to have how to transmit this kind of documents over HTTP, right? And understand is the web platform, right? What is gonna, in our case, the user platform or the web IDL, this interface definition language for the web. So that's great. Again, what is relevant in today's video is briefly describing is this is 4 sections and getting to the form. So the common infrastructure in this document, what it's describing is the common patterns, common algorithm, the core concepts that will be in all living standards. All right, and that is algorithms. So you can take a look at that, right? In this case, it's defining is this the terminology, the common syntax, but again, the common infrastructure here, spec, depends of this infra that is describe the core concepts upon the standards are built upon, and those concepts are what are the the usage here, right? But mainly is like what are the conventions, what are the algorithms, the primitive data types, the data structures, the JSONs, and forgiving and namespaces, right? Things that are fundamentals to standards, whatever standard it is, right? No matter which standard is. So there is a, okay, good, got it. Conventions, algorithms, primitive data types, and data structures, list, stack, queues, and sets, map, and structure, as well as tuple, JSON, and forgiving base 64, and namespace, right? The HTML namespace, the math ML namespace, the SVG, link, XML, and all of this. So that's interesting. So things started to make sense here on the common infrastructure. So not only that, the HTML live upon or any living standard of the common infrastructure, but also is contained is its own infrastructure, if that is defined, right? So the terminology, policy control features, common micro syntax, URLs at the HTML living standard, how to fetch resource, right? Common DOM interface, self-passing structured data, structure semantics and APIs and HTML documents. So get yourself familiar with, for example, the documents and the elements, right? And here on the elements, finally look at the HTML or the elements of HTML, right? So I'm very well familiar with the HTML element, the root elements, and then the metadata, right? So if I go back to the code here, oh no, back to the code here, right? Well, I do have now the metadata that live under the head. All right. I can also, even instead of specifying is that, I can also here is say, hey, I can specify is the meta, for example, meta tags. What do you think you're doing? Meta tags, right? The meta elements, that's right. Exactly. So the meta element, for example, and here on the meta elements, I can define things like is what are the character that's gonna be used here, the character set, you know. I can say is something like this, a char set of UTF, and this is a already defined value, right? Right? So if I do that, right? If I define is this, and then I send this document, and I don't need to specify is the header, right? My question will be is that even though the recipient should know what is the type of this. So if I try to send this data here, right? Right? If I try to send this data here, I should be able to get that as it is. So again, don't get yourself so if you look at the browser here, is this. So now the content is being rendered as it is. But again, this is because let me see if this actually served this exactly. Oh, what the French stuff? It's kind of odd. Okay, it's because I changed. It's because this is head, and the browser was smart enough to identify that error here. Okay. Yeah. Okay. The browser was smart enough to identify that error here. So, but in any case, whether if you specify the whether you specify here is at the document level or at the response level, which is something that I didn't do that. So the response right head, all right, and here is or I can say right, yeah, right head. And it gives me now an example here. So right head with a 200, okay, and the header here as an object. right? Okay, can you be more explicit about this? Can you give me an example of this? Exactly, as an object here. Right head, and there you got it, right? Exactly, but it's this one as an object. So content type, it is about this. Always try to yeah, let's go to do this. Let's go to as a good practice to get myself familiar to send always to the recipient is the media type. All right, got it. So this is it. That's right. Now let's go to write is the form. Finally. So let's take a look at the right to the form. You got it. All right. Why you don't want to go to there? It doesn't matter. Okay, you get stuck. Yeah, this. Okay, you got it. Elements of HTML. And then you got it, right? HTML, elements of HTML. So this fit all in several buckets. So you have the document, you have the metadata, the head, title, base, links, meta, or even style. You have also is the sections, body, article, sections, nav, aside. In my case, I'll prefer to go with the body. This must be, this is expected by default. Grouping content, all right, text level semantics, links, and edit embedded content, and the other is tabular data, forms, and here we are, right? Let's get in with the forms. A form is a component of a web page that has form controls such as text, which is what I want to use right now, a simple login, right? Buttons, checkboxes, range, and color pickers. A user can interact with such a form, providing data that can be sent to the server for further processing, e.g., returning the result of a search of calculation. So no client-side scripting is needed in many cases, although an API is available so that the script can augment the user experience or use form for purpose other than submitting data to a server. So writing a form consists of several steps which can be performed in any order. Writing the user interface, implementing the server-side processing, and configuring is the user to communicate with the server. So let's actually put this as part of our README of the process of creating a form. There you got it. Okay. This is not just only to do that. Is all of this, right? This is the process of creating, exactly. Form process, form creation process, right? And that is form creation process. So here you got is that one, right? 8.1, which is right in the user interface, right here. Right in the user interface, then implementing the server-side processing, right? Implementing the server-side processing. Right, and configuring is the user interface. to communicate with the server. So that indeed is the process. There you got it. Right? And okay. Got it. So this is it, right? This is it. So configure the, implementing the server-side processing, okay, under filling routes, okay, and then configure it to communicate. Then configure the interface to communicate with the server. And this is pretty much it. This is it, right? Form creation. Pretty simple, bro. So let's get into this, right? Writing the user interface. For the purpose of the brief introduction, we will create a pixel ordering form. Any form starts with a form's elements inside which are placed at control. And most controls are represented by the input elements. So in this case, you wrap them into this, which by default provides a text control. To label a control, the label element is used. The label control itself go inside of the label names. Each part of a form is considered a paragraph. Okay. Each part of a form is considered a paragraph, and it is typically separated from other part using the P elements, because P are grouping elements, right? So that's why we are actually doing this. So let's get into this. All right, we got this form, the form creation of that. Let me actually add this content here and say, hey, form creation from HTML living standard. Right, I am not messing this up. All right, from HTML living standard, and let's going to do that, my friend. Okay, so this is it. So this is the hello world, and next to that we have is the form. All right, that by default all of them are wrapped into a grouping content known as the paragraph. Okay, let me close this extension here. Grouping all of this into a paragraph, right? And the label text and control itself go inside the label. The label elements go inside the control element here, and in this case is the input, right? Input type text, right? Simple like that. Okay, and the name of this will be is the customer name, right? Let's going to follow is what the spec is going to say, customer name, right? And then you got is this. Mhm. Okay, any form start with a form element inside which are placed the control. Most controls are okay. So you got is this. Each part of a form is considered a paragraph, a grouping context, and it is typically separated from another part using P. Putting this together, here's how one might ask the customer name. Again, this section is not normative, right? But this is what the spec mentioned here. Okay, to let users select the size of the pixel, we can use a set of radio buttons. Also, the input elements, this time with type attribute with the value radio to make the radio buttons work as a group. To make the radio button works as group, they are giving a common name using name attributes. To group a batch of controls together, such as in this case, the radio buttons ones can use the field set, okay, to batch a control together. The title of such group of control is given by the first element in the field set, which has to be a legend element. So if you want to batch a control together, so if you want to batch a group of controls together, you use now a field set. Okay, you say, hey, I want to batch a group of controls together, a field set, where if you want to indicate the title of such groups, you use now is the legend, right? You use now the legend, and in our case is pixel size. That's interesting. And the possible options that you can have here expressed as a radio button. And if you want to group those radio inputs, you use now the name for that. So here we have is the input. Okay, in any control, in any group, okay, in any control, you wrap them into a grouping context. This is not normative, but it's part of the spec. And then you say, hey, well, the label here of this will be is small, all right, or medium size, whatever you want to call it. You can say here is the input, right? And in this case, this is now a type radio, right? And the name will be all of them will be the same, right? So they're gonna call this size here. And after that you say, well, type in the value here. So this case is what? Small, medium, large, right? Small, medium, and large. And that's interesting because here you don't even have to specify is the value here. You just get that from the grouping. Well, I don't know. Small, like this, and let me now duplicate is this one, right? Duplicate this one. Here's when I say things like, right, you can say isn't . So here's when I can say is there you got it. Exactly. Right. And here I can say is, well, instead of that, I prefer to select that, right? To select this one and say things like this, say small, medium, and then the other here is large, right? Large. All right, so next one is, so once I define this, to pick topping, we use check boxes. These use the input element with a type attribute with value check box here, right? So we define is kind of the same here. So if I go back to the code here and then I say is, hey, I want to group a bunch of control into a single batch, I can define that into a field set. The title of that batch of control, I use now a legend for that, and in this time it'll be called now pizza toppings, right? So pizza toppings, right? But the group here of these elements will be now is a paragraph here, and in order to make this much more straightforward, I can just copy this and then paste here, but now changing is the size here, or particularly is the grouping. That's interesting. But in this case is I don't want to group all of this because they will be independent, so you can check one or another. But this will be called now is checkbox here, and the possible value that it can be, you can add now bacon, which is something that I love, bacon, extra cheese, you know. Let's get into this, and let's go to copy this one. All right, and say things like, well, this is bacon, this is extra cheese, right? This is onion, right? This is mushroom, right? And that's right. So what I'm doing here is just creating is a basic form here for order the pizza. So the pizzeria from which this form is being written is always making mistake. So it needs a way to contact the customer, and for this purpose we can use form control specifically for telephone numbers and email address here. So let's go to add those at the top of this. So I don't want to continuously to make mistake in this pizzeria. So I want to wrap this element here, to group in this element into a grouping element. I want to wrap this input control into grouping elements, like the telephone. Say, hey, now with the label here, right? And it's inside of this label is what I'm gonna define is the input. But first is the telephone, the telephone, and the input, right? Input type text. In this case, it will be tel, right? That'll be all. And that's right. So give me if your telephone and the email address. So pretty much the same here. I think you can use the emet abbreviation to say, hey, after that, I do want to have is now a label, and that label will have a child element of an input with the type tel. Okay, with the type, this is the ID. How can I select now attributes, right? This is attribute, this is classes. Oh, this is attributes, right? To say type, right? Tel, I think it is, right? This is how you can define attributes here. Here I define very straightforward the structure of this input, customer name, telephone, and the other is the email address. But this is not the right type for this input. It must be an email here. So far so good, right? Because now with this, then next is this. Say we can use an input element with this type attribute to set time to ask for a delivery time. Many of these form controls have attributes to control exactly what values can be specified. In this case, 3 attributes in particular are interesting: min, max, and next step. These are the minimum type, the maximum time, and the interval between allowed values in seconds here. So hey, what is the preferred delivery types, right? So you can use now type for this. So if I go back to this, right, and then I say what is the preferred type here, right? And next is the text area, elements that can be used so to give now or so the customer give you now some instructions or delivery instructions. Okay, the text area, right? Got it. And finally, to make the form suitable or submittable, we use now the button elements here, right? So we use now the button here elements. So wrap this element here into a label, where the label here of this content will have is the submit order. Okay. So where this button, the content of that will be is submit. Submit order, right? And this is it, right? So what I can do right now is just to copy and paste this as a text, right? So we have our documents here, and I'm doing this is for the sake of simplicity. Rerun that Typescript compiler and generate is a new JavaScript file that is being used by nodes to run our server. And finally, when I now here on the browser, and then I browse to that, right, I now see the form here, right? Customer name, telephone, emails, right? And how you can select is now this. And this is a very interesting thing because I'm choosing is one of the possible options with radio buttons. And if you need to select more, you use now a checkbox. Okay. So this is good. And the other is a delivery time, right? The minimum time you can specify is the minimum, right? And the maxima as well, right? That's interesting. Hey, this has to be a 10 or 11, so on and so forth, right? And some delivery instruction, and then submit order. So value must be at 11 a.m. or later, because, well, this is part of the constraint that I set it. Okay, please enter a valid number. The two nearest valid numbers are 11:45 and 12. So again, it's part of this checking here, HTML checking here. And then you can submit this size on. So that'll be all for the describing the UI. All right, this is all for describing the UI. So take care. Bye bye.